Birthdays used to be magical when I was a kid. You know, the kind of day where nothing could go wrong. My 9th birthday started like that. Bright balloons, a circus-themed cake, and all my friends running around the backyard. We lived in Salem, Massachusetts. Our house had this huge yard that backed into a thick forest. Mom always told me to stay away from the woods, saying I could get lost in there. But on my birthday, the woods didn't feel scary. They were just there. A quiet backdrop to my party. That day was perfect. The sun was out. The breeze carried the smell of hot dogs from the grill. And my best friend Brian had already made me laugh so hard I almost cried. Everything felt right. But then Mom called me over. She had that look. You know, the one parents get when they're nervous but trying not to show it. "Sweetie," she said, kneeling to my level, "stay in the yard, okay? And don't go near the woods." "I know, Mom," I said, rolling my eyes. She sighed. "It's just, there have been some strange things happening in the neighborhood. Some people said they saw someone wandering around, dressed like a clown." "A clown?" I laughed. "Cool." Her face didn't change. "Not cool. Promise me if you see anything, you come straight to me. No games, no jokes, promise." Okay, I promise." I didn't think much of it after that. How could I? It was my birthday and I was surrounded by presents, friends, and games. But looking back, I should have noticed how quiet she seemed, how she kept glancing at the woods like she was waiting for something. The party was in full swing. We were playing baseball in the yard when Brian hit the ball a little too hard. It bounced past me, rolled across the grass, and disappeared near the tree line. "I'll get it," I shouted, running after it. The ball had stopped just a few feet from the woods. I bent down to pick it up, and that's when I saw him. At first, I thought he was part of the party, maybe a clown Mom hired as a surprise. But something about him wasn't right. His outfit was old and faded, like it had been sitting in a closet for years. His face paint was smeared, and his smile, it was too wide, too forced. "Happy birthday," he said, his voice smooth and low. I froze. How did he know it was my birthday? Thanks," I said, clutching the ball. "You've got a lot of friends here," he continued. "I bet they got you some great presents. But I know what you really want." I tilted my head. "You do?" "A rabbit," he said, grinning. My stomach flipped. I hadn't told anyone I wanted a rabbit. It was just something I'd been secretly wishing for. "How did you—" "I can show you one," he interrupted, pointing into the woods. "It's just a little further in. Come on." I didn't move. Something about him made my skin crawl, but at the same time I was curious. Maybe he really did have a rabbit. Maybe this was part of the party after all. I glanced back at the yard. Everyone was busy playing and laughing. No one was looking at me. "Okay," I said, taking a hesitant step forward. The moment I stepped into the woods, the atmosphere changed. The sunlight barely broke through the dense trees, and the air was cooler, almost damp. Every step I took felt heavier, like the ground was pulling me down. The clown walked ahead, his movements smooth and deliberate. I followed, gripping the baseball tightly, my heart pounding harder with every step. "So," I said, trying to sound casual, "where's the rabbit?" "Not far now," he replied without turning around. His voice sounded different in the woods, harsher, almost hollow. We walked deeper, and the sounds of the party faded completely. It was just me, the clown, and the crunch of leaves underfoot. That's when I started noticing things. Broken branches, scraps of fabric caught on bushes, and a strange metallic smell in the air. "Actually," I said, stopping in my tracks, "I think I should go back." The clown turned to face me, his smile gone. "Why?" he asked, tilting his head. I just..." Before I could finish, his hand shot out and grabbed my arm. His grip was cold and impossibly strong. "We're almost there," he said, his smile returning, but it didn't reach his eyes. Panic hit me like a wave. I yanked my arm, but he didn't let go. His smile widened, and I saw something in his other hand, a long, rusted pair of scissors. "You promised to come," he said, his voice low and menacing. "Don't break your promise." "I didn't promise anything," I yelled, twisting and pulling with all my strength. He laughed, a sound that sent chills down my spine. "Oh, but you did." I did the only thing I could think of. I swung the baseball and hit him square in the chest. He staggered back, his grip loosening just enough for me to break free. I didn't wait. I turned and ran, branches whipping against my face as I tore through the woods. Behind me, I could hear him laughing, his footsteps crunching through the leaves. "Run, little rabbit," he called after me. "Run, run, run!" I burst out of the woods, gasping for air, and ran straight into my mom's arms. "What happened?" she asked, her voice panicked. "A clown," I cried. "In the woods, he tried to grab me." My dad and a few of the neighbors grabbed flashlights and ran into the woods. The police were called, and soon the yard was swarming with officers. I told them everything, the clown, the scissors, the way he knew about the rabbit. They searched the woods for hours, but when they came back, they said they couldn't find him. What they did find, though, was worse. Deep in the woods, the police found an old shed. Inside, they discovered piles of children's belongings, shoes, toys, even a half-eaten birthday cake. And on the walls, painted in smeared red letters, was a message: "Rabbits never escape." The officers said the clown had been living there for years, luring kids into the woods. He'd leave just enough behind to make them disappear without a trace. They never caught him. For weeks, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face, heard his laugh. Even now, years later, I can't walk past a forest without feeling like he's watching me, waiting for the right moment to pounce. Somewhere out there, the clown is still waiting. And I know one thing for sure: he never forgets a promise. I still can't step into a park without my stomach twisting into knots. Every time I hear kids laughing or see a clown, my chest tightens like I'm back in Traverse City that day. It was my little sister Bella's 10th birthday. She was so excited. Balloons, cake, games, the whole 9 yards. My mom went all out, renting this picnic area in one of those parks right by the forest. You know the type. Tall trees, a couple of walking trails, and way too many places to disappear. Bella was obsessed with clowns, so naturally Mom hired one. She found him online, some guy named Sonny the Clown. He had good reviews, a cheesy website, and nothing out of the ordinary. Everything felt so normal at first. Bella was running around with her friends, and I was just stuck there, bored out of my mind, scrolling through my phone and trying to drown out the sound of kids screaming. Then I heard it. This faint sound, almost like laughter, but it didn't come from the party. It came from the forest. I shrugged it off, figured it was just my imagination, but it didn't stop. It was faint, distant, like someone was giggling deep in the woods. When the clown didn't show up at the time he was supposed to, Mom started freaking out. She called the guy, but it went straight to voicemail. "What kind of professional doesn't show up for a kid's birthday?" she muttered, pacing back and forth. Bella looked crushed, so I tried to cheer her up by joining in on one of the games, though I wasn't much help. That's when he appeared. "Hey everyone, sorry I'm late." The voice boomed across the picnic area, cheerful and loud, and every kid turned their head to see him. The clown. Except he wasn't Sonny. This guy called himself Mr. Giggles. His costume was similar. Baggy pants, a bright red nose, oversized shoes. But there was something off about him. His makeup wasn't quite right. It looked like it had been slapped on in a hurry, smeared around the edges. His clothes were a little dirty, with stains on his oversized gloves that I hoped were ketchup. He had this weird way of moving, almost too bouncy, like he was forcing himself to look cheerful. Bella was thrilled. She ran up to him, giggling and clapping her hands. I wanted to pull her back, but I didn't want to ruin her big day. Mr. Giggles started pulling tricks out of his hat. Literally, balloons, scarves, even a stuffed rabbit. The kids loved it, but I kept watching him. He avoided eye contact with the parents, like he didn't want them looking too closely. When he laughed, it sounded forced, like someone imitating a laugh they'd only heard in a movie. At one point, he pulled a lollipop out of his pocket and handed it to Bella. She looked up at him with the biggest smile I'd ever seen, but something about the way his hand lingered, how he tilted his head to watch her take it, it made my skin crawl. Then he turned and looked directly at me. His eyes weren't cheerful. They were sharp, cold, and I swear they were daring me to say something. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I was overthinking things. Maybe I just hated clowns. But something about Mr. Giggles made my stomach churn. I kept my eye on him while the party went on. The kids were laughing, Bella was beaming, and for a second I thought maybe I was just being paranoid. Then he said it. "Who wants to go on a magical adventure?" His voice was sing-songy, like he was reading from a bad script. The kids cheered and clapped, and Bella, of course, was the first to jump up. "Me, I do." Mr. Giggles pointed toward the woods. "The magic's that way. Who's brave enough to come with me?" I froze. No way. No freaking way was I letting my sister go into the woods with this guy. But before I could say anything, little Tommy, one of Bella's friends, ran up to him. "I'll go," he said, grinning ear to ear. "Tommy, no," I blurted, but no one seemed to hear me. Mr. Giggles leaned down, patting Tommy on the head. "That's the spirit," he said. Then he turned to the rest of the kids. "Anyone else? Don't be shy." Bella took a step forward and I grabbed her arm. "No," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Stay here." She pouted but didn't argue, which was a miracle in itself. I watched as Mr. Giggles led Tommy toward the tree line, his oversized shoes crunching on the gravel path. A few other kids followed, but they stopped just short of the trees, giggling nervously. Then Tommy disappeared into the shadows with him. It didn't take long, maybe a minute. 2 at most. A scream tore through the air, high-pitched and terrified, the kind of scream that makes your blood run cold. Every head at the party turned toward the woods. The kids froze, their laughter dying in their throats. The parents started murmuring, confused, but I didn't wait. I ran. I sprinted toward the tree line, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. "Tommy!" I yelled, my voice echoing through the trees. "Where are you?" I didn't get far. Just a few steps into the woods, I saw it. A small blue baseball cap lying in the dirt. Tommy's cap. And next to it, blood. My legs locked up, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Then I heard the giggle. It was soft, almost playful, but it sent a chill down my spine. I looked up, and there he was. Mr. Giggles, standing just a few feet away, half hidden behind a tree. His makeup was smeared even worse now, his smile stretched too wide. "Tommy had to go home early," he said, his voice low and mocking. "But don't worry, the magic show's not over yet." I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet. "What did you do?" I whispered. He didn't answer. He just stared at me, his eyes glittering in the dim light filtering through the trees. Then he took a step forward. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush, barely able to see where I was going. By the time I made it back to the party, I was gasping for air, my chest heaving. "Call the police!" I shouted. "Something's wrong. Tommy's gone." The parents looked at me like I was crazy. "What are you talking about?" one of them said. "Mr. Giggles just left. He said he had another gig to get to." But I knew better. He wasn't gone, not really. The police came quickly. Traverse City isn't exactly a bustling place, so a missing kid was enough to bring half the department. I tried to explain everything. The blood, the scream, the way Mr. Giggles had looked at me. But they didn't take me seriously. One of the officers, a guy named Officer Harris, sighed. "Son, we'll search the woods, but clowns don't just snatch kids in broad daylight. You're probably just shaken up." Shaken up? I wanted to scream at him. But instead I watched as they organized a search party, flashlights cutting through the shadows of the forest. They found nothing. No blood. No baseball cap. No sign of Tommy. The parents started leaving with their kids, whispering nervously, their eyes darting toward the woods. My mom was furious. She told me I must have misunderstood, that Tommy probably just wandered off and would be found soon. But I knew better. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face. His smeared makeup, his too wide smile, the glittering malice in his eyes. Around midnight I heard it again, the laugh. It wasn't outside, it was inside the house. I shot up in bed, my heart pounding. The sound was faint, like it was coming from the living room. Grabbing the baseball bat I kept under my bed, I crept down the hallway, my hands shaking so hard I could barely hold on. And there he was, Mr. Giggles, standing in the middle of the living room, his back to me. His costume was filthy now, torn in places, and his shoulders were hunched like he was holding something heavy. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. He turned slowly, and I saw what he was holding. Bella. "Let her go," I screamed, finally finding my voice. I raised the bat, ready to swing, but he just laughed. That same horrible giggle that sent shivers down my spine. "Don't worry," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "She's going to love the magic show." Before I could move, he lunged at me, his speed unnatural, like he wasn't human anymore. His face had changed. It wasn't just a clown anymore. His mouth was filled with jagged teeth, his eyes glowing a sickly yellow. I swung the bat as hard as I could, hitting him square in the side. He stumbled, dropping Bella, who scrambled to her feet and ran to hide behind me. "You shouldn't have done that," he growled, his voice no longer playful. It was deep, guttural, like something out of a nightmare. Grabbing Bella's hand, I bolted for the front door. He chased us, his heavy footsteps pounding behind me, closer and closer. I could feel his breath on the back of my neck as we ran into the street, screaming for help. The neighbors' porch lights flicked on and someone shouted, "What's going on?" That was enough to make him stop. He stood there, just out of the light, his monstrous figure silhouetted against the darkness. "This isn't over," he said, his voice carrying through the night. Then he turned and disappeared into the shadows. The police didn't believe me when I told them what happened. They chalked it up to stress, a prank gone wrong, even though Bella swore she saw him too. They never found Tommy. It's been years since that night, but I still hear his laugh sometimes, echoing in the back of my mind. And every time I see a clown, I can't help but wonder, is it him? Is he still out there, waiting for his next magic show? I hope you never find out. I'll never forget the night Jack came up with the dumbest and most thrilling idea for my 21st birthday. It was supposed to be a chill celebration. Maybe grab some drinks, hang out at the house, keep it low-key. But Jack? Nah. Jack's brain never worked that way. "Dude," he said, slamming his hand on the kitchen table. "You only turned 21 once. We gotta do something epic, something no one else would dare to do." Emily, my girlfriend, rolled her eyes. "Here we go," she muttered. "What if," Jack continued, ignoring her, "we hit up Funland tonight? You know, the old amusement park outside Salem." The room went silent. Even Matt, who never took anything seriously, looked up from his phone. "Are you out of your mind?" Emily said, crossing her arms. "That place is abandoned for a reason. People say it's haunted." "That's just a stupid urban legend," Jack said with a grin. "Come on, Em, live a little. Besides, think of the photos we could get for Instagram. Everyone's gonna be jealous." Sophie, always the curious one, chimed in. "Honestly, it sounds kinda cool. Creepy, but cool." I wasn't totally sold, but the idea of doing something outrageous for my birthday felt right. "All right," I said, shrugging. "Why not? Let's do it." Emily groaned. "Fine. But when we get arrested for trespassing, I'm blaming you, Jack." An hour later, we were piled into Jack's beat-up Jeep, heading down the dark, winding roads toward Funland. The air felt heavy, like the night itself knew we were making a mistake. When we got to Funland, I kinda wished we'd turned around. The place looked worse than I remembered from when it was still open. The big neon sign at the entrance was cracked, the letters barely readable under the faint glow of the moon. The gates were wide open, creaking softly in the breeze like they were inviting us in. This place gives me the creeps, Emily whispered, holding onto my arm. Jack, on the other hand, was loving every second of it. This is awesome, he said, pulling out his phone to take a video. Look at this place. It's like a horror movie set. We stepped inside, and the air immediately felt colder. The ride stood like skeletons, their paint faded and chipped. An old carousel sat in the center, its horses frozen mid-gallop, their glassy eyes staring at nothing. Okay, so we're here, Emily said, trying to sound calm. Now what? Jack grinned. We explored, As we wandered deeper into the park, strange noises started to echo around us. The wind howled through the metal structures, creating an eerie whistling sound. Somewhere in the distance, I swore I heard faint laughter. You guys hear that? Sophie asked, stopping in her tracks. Hear what? Jack said, playing it cool. That, laughing. It's probably just the wind, Matt said, but he didn't sound convinced. We kept walking, and that's when we found it. A mural of a clown covered one of the walls. Its face was painted in bright, garish colors, but time had worn it down, making it look twisted and distorted. Creepy as hell, I muttered. Wait, let me get a picture, Sophie said, pulling out her camera. While she snapped photos, Matt bent down to pick something up. Guys, he said, holding it up. It was a phaco. Old, rusty, and covered in what looked like dried blood. No one laughed this time. What the hell is that doing here? Emily asked, her voice shaky. Matt turned the phaco in his hands as if trying to convince himself it wasn't real. Maybe it's a prop? Like leftover from when the park was open? Jack snorted. Yeah, because every family park needs a rusty murder weapon for decoration. Put it down, Sophie snapped, her eyes darting nervously around. Seriously, Matt, that thing's freaking me out. Reluctantly, Matt set it on the ground, but the uneasiness lingered. The laughter we'd heard earlier suddenly didn't feel like the wind. We decided to keep moving, though the fun, adventurous vibe was long gone. The deeper we went into the park, the darker it seemed to get. The moonlight barely reached the cracked asphalt beneath our feet, and the rides around us cast long, twisted shadows. And then, we saw him. It started with a faint movement near the carousel, a flicker of color in the corner of my eye. Did you see that? I whispered. See what? Jack asked, but his cocky tone was gone. Before I could answer, he stepped out of the shadows. A clown. His costume was bright, too bright for the muted tones of the park. Reds, yellows, and blues in patterns that clashed horribly. His face was painted white with exaggerated features, a massive red smile that stretched too far, eyes ringed in black that seemed to sink into his skull. He was holding a phaco. Oh my God, Emily whispered, clutching my arm. The clown just stood there staring at us. Then he tilted his head and let out a laugh, high-pitched, manic, and completely unhinged. Run! Sophie screamed. We didn't need to be told twice. We sprinted through the park, our breaths coming in ragged gasps. The clown's laughter echoed behind us, growing louder and closer with every step. This way, Jack yelled, leading us toward a rundown building that looked like it had once been a funhouse. We burst through the door and slammed it shut behind us. The sound of the lock clicking into place was the only thing that kept me from completely losing it. Inside, the air was stale, and the faint smell of mildew mixed with something metallic. Broken mirrors lined the walls, their jagged edges catching the weak light. What the hell was that? Matt panted, leaning against the door. A clown, Sophie said, her voice trembling. An actual freaking clown with a phaco. No way that's real, Jack said, pacing back and forth. It's gotta be some crazy prank, like someone messing with us. Does that make it better? Emily snapped. Prank or not, he has a weapon, Jack. Before we could argue more, a voice interrupted us. You shouldn't be here. We all jumped, spinning around to see an old man standing in the shadows. He looked like he'd stepped out of another time, wearing overalls and a dirty baseball cap. Who are you? I asked, my voice shaking. George, he said simply. I look after the place. You live here? Sophie asked, incredulous. He nodded. Someone's got to keep the vandals out. But you kids, you made a mistake coming here. No kidding, Matt muttered. George sighed and leaned against a cracked mirror. You saw him, didn't you? The clown. Yeah, and he's trying to kill us, Emily cried. George's face darkened. That's Max. Used to be a performer here, back when the park was alive. He was the main attraction. People loved him. But then he changed. Got accused of doing some terrible things. The owners fired him, and he didn't take it well. What happened? I asked. He snapped, came back one night, and let's just say a lot of people didn't make it out alive. Why is he still here? Sophie whispered. George shook his head. Some say he's just a man, hiding out in the ruins. Others think he's something worse, a spirit, tied to this place by the blood he spilled. Great, Jack said, throwing up his hands. So how do we get out of here? George reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled map of the park. There's a maintenance tunnel that leads to the back gate. It's your best shot. I took the map, my hands shaking. What about you? I'll be fine, George said, his voice calm. But you need to go. Now. The sound of faint laughter echoed outside, and we didn't argue. We didn't waste any time. With George's map in hand, we slipped out of the funhouse through a back door, trying to stay as quiet as possible. The clown's laughter had faded, but the tension in the air was suffocating. Where's this tunnel? Emily whispered, leaning on me for support as we moved. Her ankle was still giving her trouble. Not far, I said, glancing at the map. Just past the Ferris wheel. Let's pick up the pace, Jack urged, looking over his shoulder. The Ferris wheel loomed in the distance like a giant rusted skeleton. Its once bright lights were long gone, but the wind made it creak and groan, as if it were alive. We were halfway there when we heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps. Shh, Sophie hissed, freezing in place. The footsteps stopped, replaced by that horrible, high-pitched laugh. Run! Jack yelled, and we took off again, the map crumpled in my hand. We zigzagged through the park, dodging broken rides and debris. The clown was relentless, his footsteps pounding behind us. Every time I glanced back, I saw him, his brightly colored costume, the glint of the facot in his hand, that painted smile that never wavered. Emily stumbled, nearly taking me down with her. I can't. Yes, you can, I said, pulling her up. We're almost there. Finally, we spotted the entrance to the maintenance tunnel, a heavy metal door partially hidden behind an overgrown hedge. Jack reached it first, yanking it open. Go, go, go! We scrambled inside, slamming the door shut just as the clown's laughter reached its peak. For a moment, there was silence, save for our ragged breathing. But then, the door rattled. He's trying to get in, Matt yelled, throwing his weight against it. We can't stay here, I said, shining my flashlight down the tunnel. It leads straight to the back gate, we just have to keep moving. The sound of metal scraping against metal told us the clown wouldn't be held back for long. The tunnel was long and narrow, with pipes running along the walls and water dripping from the ceiling. Every step echoed, making it impossible to tell if the clown was behind us. Are we almost there? Sophie asked, her voice shaking. I checked the map. Just a little further. The tunnel ended in a small open area with a ladder leading up to a hatch. The back gate was just beyond it. Jack climbed up first, pushing the hatch open. We're clear, he called down. One by one, we climbed out. The gate was right there, a towering iron structure that looked like it hadn't been used in years. We need the key, I said, digging through my pockets. George had given it to me back in the funhouse. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. Hurry, Emily urged, limping toward the gate. As I fumbled with the lock, that laugh rang out again. The clown was here. He emerged from the shadows like something out of a nightmare, his painted face twisted into a grotesque grin. Keep him away from me, I yelled, trying to get the key in the lock. Jack grabbed a nearby piece of wood and swung it at the clown, but he dodged it effortlessly. Sophie threw rocks, but it only seemed to make him angrier. Finally, the lock clicked. "It's open," I shouted. Emily and Sophie pushed the gate open while Jack and Matt held the clown off. "Come on," I yelled. The clown lunged at Jack, knocking him to the ground. Matt threw himself at the clown, buying us a few precious seconds. "We can't leave them," Emily cried. "They're right behind us," I said, dragging her through the gate. Jack and Matt managed to break free, sprinting toward us just as we slammed the gate shut. The clown slammed into it, his painted face inches from mine. He didn't try to open the gate. He just stood there laughing as we backed away. And then, just as suddenly as he'd appeared, he turned and disappeared into the darkness. We didn't stop running until we reached the main road. The lights of passing cars felt like a lifeline, pulling us out of the nightmare we'd just survived. My chest was heaving, my legs felt like jelly, but the relief of being out of that park was overwhelming. "Is everyone okay?" I asked, my voice hoarse. Emily nodded, though tears streaked her face. Jack and Matt were hunched over, catching their breath, and Sophie was clutching her phone like it was the only thing grounding her to reality. "We made it," Jack finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We freaking made it." But none of us cheered. The memory of that clown's laugh still echoed in my head. "What the hell was that thing?" Matt asked, breaking the silence. I shook my head. "I don't know. George said he was just a man, but it didn't feel like it." "Whatever he is, he's still out there," Sophie said, glancing back toward the park. That thought sent a chill down my spine. I couldn't shake the image of his painted face, his eyes locked on mine as we slammed the gate shut. "What about George?" Emily asked. "We left him behind." We all exchanged uneasy looks. Deep down, we knew he wouldn't have made it out. "We have to tell someone," Sophie said. "The cops, the news, anyone." "And say what?" Jack asked. "That we were chased through an abandoned park by a psychotic clown? They'll laugh us out of the room." "She's right," I said. "Even if they don't believe us, someone needs to know. If we don't, more people could end up like us, or worse." We agreed to call the police as soon as we got home. But as the night wore on and the adrenaline faded, reality set in. Who would believe us? A part of me wanted to let it go, to push the whole thing out of my mind and pretend it never happened. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, waiting in the shadows of that park, laughing, biding his time. So here I am, telling you this story, not because I think you'll believe me, but because you need to know. If you're ever in Salem, Massachusetts, and you see the gates of Funland, stay away. Don't be curious, don't think it's just an old urban legend, because Max is still out there and he's waiting for someone like you to walk through those gates. You know those random days when your past creeps back into your life like an uninvited guest? That was me last week. I was digging through an old box in the attic. Dusty photos, faded birthday cards, the usual stuff. When I found it, a photo from my 10th birthday party. At first glance, it was just another memory. A sunny day at Lincoln Park, balloons everywhere and kids laughing. But then I noticed him. In the corner of the photo, there he was, the clown. He wasn't smiling, not really. His painted-on grin looked forced, his eyes too sharp, too wrong. My stomach twisted. I hadn't thought about that day in years, but now the memories came flooding back faster than I could process. Mom had hired Mr. Giggles to perform at my party. She found him in one of those cheap local ads, you know, the kind printed in bold letters with promises of fun for all kids. At the time, I was excited. A clown for my birthday? Cool, right? Turns out it was the worst decision of her life. The day started off fine, normal even. Dad set up tables, Mom handed out party hats, and I raced around the park with my friends. When Mr. Giggles showed up in his battered old van, everyone cheered. Well, except me. There was something off about him. His costume looked dirty, like it hadn't been washed in years, and those shoes, massive floppy things that squeaked with every step, made me shiver for reasons I couldn't explain. Still, he handed me a balloon shaped like a dog and cracked a few jokes, so I ignored the uneasy feeling. Maybe it was just nerves. After all, it was my big day. But then he brought out the puppets. The kids loved the puppets at first, until they didn't. They were creepy in that old-timey thrift store way. One had a missing eye, another had a wide, toothy grin painted on too big for its face. Mr. Giggles gave each puppet a name, like Smiley Sam and Dancing Debbie. He made them wave and talk in silly voices, but something about them didn't sit right. I remember one puppet in particular, a little boy wearing overalls. Mr. Giggles called him Tommy. When Tommy's head turned to look at me, I swore it moved on its own. No strings, no jerky hand motions, just a smooth, deliberate turn. I froze, my cupcake halfway to my mouth. Relax, I told myself. It's a puppet. You're imagining things. Then came the games. Mr. Giggles organized a round of hide and seek. He split us into 2 teams and told us to find the best hiding spots in the park. I picked a spot behind a tree, close enough to see the action, but hidden enough to feel safe. As I crouched there, I noticed something weird. One of the kids, Mia, was standing near Mr. Giggles laughing at something he said. Then just like that, she was gone. Not like she ran off. No, she disappeared. When I peeked out again, Mr. Giggles was holding Tommy the puppet. It was sitting in his arms, its painted smile aimed directly at me. I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment everything changed. Looking back, I wish I'd run then. I wish I'd grabbed my mom, screamed for help, anything. But I didn't. I was just a scared kid, too confused to act. Instead, I stayed frozen behind that tree, my eyes locked on Mr. Giggles and that creepy little puppet. The game of hide and seek continued. Kids darted between trees, laughing and yelling, but the laughter felt wrong, like it didn't belong anymore. One by one, I noticed fewer voices. I peeked around the tree and saw Mr. Giggles standing near the edge of the park. His van was parked a little too close and the back doors were wide open. And then I saw it, Mia's pink shoe lying on the ground near the van. My heart dropped. I wanted to scream for someone, anyone, but my throat tightened. I tried convincing myself it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe she ran back to the picnic table. Maybe she was with her parents. But then Tommy's head turned again. This time it wasn't smooth like before. It jerked sharply, like it was snapping to attention. Its painted-on eyes seemed to lock on mine, and I swear I heard a faint, scratchy voice. Your turn. I stumbled backward, tripping over a root and landing hard on my hands. I didn't care about being quiet anymore. I ran straight for the picnic table, yelling, "Mom, something's wrong!" When I reached the table, I was out of breath, clutching at my mom's arm. She looked at me, startled. "What's wrong, honey?" "It's Mr. Giggles," I panted. He took Mia." Mom frowned, her face shifting between concern and disbelief. "Sweetie, Mia's probably playing somewhere. It's just a game." "No," I shouted. "Her shoe's by his van. And his puppet. It's not normal." Other parents started looking over, their smiles fading. One of the dads, Mr. Harris, spoke up. "Let's go check it out. Probably nothing, but no harm in making sure." I followed them as they walked toward the van. My stomach twisted with every step. Mr. Giggles stood nearby, his painted smile wide and unbothered. "Everything all right, folks?" he asked, his voice too cheerful, too fake. "We just want to take a look, Mr. Harris said, already heading for the open doors. The inside of the van made my skin crawl. Strings of balloons hung from the ceiling, but they weren't colorful or fun. They were deflated, sagging like something lifeless. On one wall, there were photos pinned up, smiling kids, birthday cakes, party hats. And then there were the puppets. They sat on a shelf, propped up in stiff, unnatural poses. One of them, Tommy, was holding something in its tiny wooden hand, Mia's other shoe. "Jesus Christ, Mr. E," Harris muttered, stepping back. But before anyone could say a word, the van doors slammed shut. Mr. Giggles stood there, his grin stretched impossibly wide. "I told you it's just part of the act," he said, his voice lower now, almost a growl. That was when the lights in the park flickered and the screaming started. The park descended into chaos. Parents scrambled to find their kids. calling out names as shadows stretched and twisted under the flickering park lights. I stood frozen, watching Mr. Giggles step closer, his painted grin almost glowing in the dim light. His voice rang out, calm and menacing. "The show isn't over yet, folks." The puppets, those horrible puppets, were moving now. Not like toys on strings, but like living things, jerky and unnatural. Tommy leaped from the van, landing on all fours before tilting his head toward me. That same scratchy voice I'd heard before whispered, "Your turn." I bolted, my heart pounding so loud it drowned out the screams around me. My legs carried me toward the edge of the park, but I couldn't leave, not without doing something. I had to stop him. I ducked behind a bench, desperately trying to come up with a plan. My eyes scanned the chaos until they landed on something near the picnic table, the cake knife. I darted toward it, narrowly avoiding one of the puppets that lunged at my legs. I grabbed the knife, clutching it so tightly my knuckles turned white. When I turned back, Mr. Giggles was standing right in front of me. "Ah, Amanda," he said almost kindly. "You've always been the brave one." I didn't think. I just swung. The knife slashed across his costume, cutting through the fabric and revealing something dark and writhing beneath. Black smoke seeped out, curling into the air like it was alive. Mr. Giggles staggered back, his grin faltering for the first time. "You think you can stop me?" he hissed, his voice no longer human. I kept swinging, slashing through the smoky figure that was once Mr. Giggles. Each strike sent him retreating further, his form becoming less solid, less real. The puppets screamed in unison, their tiny wooden limbs thrashing as if they could feel his pain. Finally, with one last blow, the smoke exploded outward, dissipating into the night. The park fell silent. The light stopped flickering and the air felt lighter, cleaner somehow. I dropped the knife, my hands shaking. Around me, parents and kids slowly emerged from their hiding spots, their faces pale and confused. Mia was there. So were the other missing kids, standing near the van as if they'd just woken from a dream. I ran to my mom, collapsing into her arms as tears streamed down my face. "He's gone," I whispered. "It's over." Or so I thought. Days later, as I packed away my childhood photos, I found another picture. It was one I didn't remember being taken, me at the park, holding a balloon. Behind me in the shadows was a figure. Not quite a man, not quite smoke, but grinning. And then there was the sound. Faint but unmistakable, like a laugh carried on the wind. I still hear it sometimes late at night when the house is quiet. A soft, raspy voice saying, "Your turn."